Hi, my name is Beth and I'm the sewing pattern designer and blogger at Sew DIY. Today I'm going to show you a few tips for getting started sewing with knit fabric. I think most people usually start out sewing woven fabric, and so moving on to knits can sometimes be a little intimidating and scary. I know that when I first wanted to sew with knit fabric, I was really scared and I didn't know what to do and I didn't know how to start. But it's really not that hard, and with just a few little different techniques, you'll be able to sew with knits in no time. Let's get started. So my first tip is to really get to know your knit fabric. Just like with woven fabric, you're going to want to make sure to cut on the straight of grain. So woven fabric is constructed a little differently than knit fabric. Woven has threads that go this way, and they're all interlaced. And then knit fabric has a series of loops that interconnect one row to the next. So there are some cool properties to that, like knit fabric won't fray as much as woven fabric, but it can also get stretched out a little bit. And you can often fix that stretching with an iron. But you can also make it stretch out more with an iron, so you just need to be a little bit careful. Anyway, before you start cutting, you want to make sure that you get your fabric lined up on the straight of grain. So I like to pick it up and match the two selvage edges together. And you hold it up, and if you see these lines going like this, then you know that it's not folded straight. So you just need to adjust the selvages left and right until you get it straight. So it just takes a little wiggling, shifting back and forth, and just getting to know your fabric. So let's see, here we're not quite there. All right, so this is pretty good. We don't have those pole lines anymore. So see, it's hanging pretty straight from the selvage down to the folded edge, and you want to get that as straight as possible, and it can just take a little bit of fidgeting around. So now that we have that determined, we're going to keep this together and take it to our cutting table or floor. So my second tip is to use a rotary cutter to cut out your project. It's just a lot easier than using scissors, because when you use scissors, you have to lift up the fabric and it'll move a little bit. But with the rotary cutter, it just works like a pizza slicer. And you open up the blade and then just slice your fabric. So it's really easy. It keeps everything very stable. And it's really worth the investment for both wovens and knit fabrics. So tip number 3 is to use a stitch that has stretch. Because your knit fabric has stretch to it, and when you wear your garments, you're going to be moving around and moving the fabric, you're going to put pressure on that stitch, and it's going to need to stretch along with the fabric and your body movements. And if your stitch doesn't have any stretch to it, those stitches might break. So your conventional machine has a few options for that. The most common one is a zigzag stitch. So this stitch just goes back and forth like this, and to sew a seam you can just use a narrow stitch with a regular stitch length. Another option is to use what's called a stretch stitch or a lightning stitch, and this is very similar to the zigzag stitch, except that it has one long zig and then a very short zag. This stitch is great because it's very, very secure, but it's also really challenging to unpick. So if you want to use this stitch, I recommend basting your seam first and making sure your fit is good, and then doing your lightning stitch. Another option is a triple straight stitch. So this is just like a straight stitch, except that the stitch will go 3 times in one place, but it still has some stretch to it. Another option that I don't have a sample of is a triple zigzag stitch. So that will stitch 3 stitches in a zig and then 3 in a zag. This one is really used a lot in lingerie, and it's a really handy stitch to know and to have. If you also have a serger, they are fantastic for sewing knits, and they will use 3 or 4 threads, and it creates a very nice stretchy stitch. This is my preferred method for sewing knits, with the exception being times when I want to press a seam open. In those cases, I would use one of the stitches on my conventional machine so that I can press this seam open. Before you start sewing your garment, I always recommend grabbing a scrap of fabric and testing out a few different stitches to make sure that you find one that you really like and one that works with your fabric. My 4th tip for sewing with knit fabrics is to use a walking foot. Most machines these days do come with a walking foot, or you can purchase them separately. They look kind of like this, with this big piece on the back and then these little grippers that will help feed the top layer of fabric through. So this is really helpful to make sure that your fabric doesn't get stretched out while you're sewing it. I already have a walking foot attached to this machine, and let's just see how it works. So as we can see right here, this little bit is moving up and down and feeding the fabric through. There are also some machines that have this technology built in, and you just move a little lever that's in the back down and it'll help feed the fabric through. If you don't have a walking foot, I recommend getting some tissue paper. It can just be any old piece of tissue paper or tracing paper, and you'll put that down on the bed of your machine and then put your fabric on top, and you'll just sew through the fabric and the tissue paper. This will help the fabric just move along underneath the feed dogs. So you just sew right on top of it. And then when you're done, you can just peel away the tissue paper. Before I had a machine that had a walking foot, this is the technique that I would use to sew all of my knit fabric. This is also a handy tip if you're ever having problems with fabric not feeding through well. You can just put a little tissue at the back end to help it get started stitching, or if your fabric is going down underneath the needle plate, just put some tissue underneath and it'll help prevent it from getting caught underneath the needle. My 5th tip is to use a ballpoint or jersey needle when you are stitching knit fabric. These needles will just behave better with the knit fabric and will give you better stitch quality. Just like with choosing a stitch to use, you'll also want to test out different needles to find the one that works best with your fabric. When I'm sewing like regular t-shirt knits, a ballpoint or a jersey works great, but I've found that with kind of specialty materials like swimwear or elastic, I have to do more experimentation, and often a stretch needle will work better. So you have a few different options. Just try different things and find out what works best for your fabric. My 6th and final tip is just to dive in and start sewing. There's nothing as good as just actually practicing, trying it out, and expanding your skills. I've been sewing for 25 years and I'm still learning things every day. But with each new project and every skill that I learn and all that practice, I've become much more confident in my sewing and feel like I can tackle almost anything without any problems. That said, I also like to do a lot of research. So I wanted to share some of my favorite Sewing with Knits books. The first one that I got probably almost 15 years ago was Sew You Home Stretch by Wendy Mullen, and this was really just my Bible for sewing with knits. I read it back to front, looking at every detail, you know, learning everything I could from this. So this was one of my favorites. It comes with a lot of patterns for dresses and t-shirts, sweatshirts, skirts. There's a skirt pattern in there that I've actually sewn like 5 times. My next favorite book is a newer one, and this is The Beginner's Guide to Sewing with Knitted Fabric by Wendy Ward. And this is a fantastic book. It's really detailed on all the techniques that you'll need to sew with knit fabric, and it also includes a lot of really beautiful garment patterns that you can wear in your everyday life. The third book is a little more advanced, but still really accessible, and this is Sew Your Own Activewear by Melissa Fair. So this really gets into how to sew clothing that you'll use for exercise. I'm planning to do lots more videos about sewing with knit fabric, so stay tuned for that. Let me know in the comments what you've learned today, and if you have any more questions. And if you want to follow along and see new videos, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to get notified when new videos are released. Happy sewing!